Imagine walking into a room and having absolutely no idea that someone has already been paying attention to you. Not casually, not in the normal way, not in the way someone notices you for 2 seconds, thinks you look interesting, and then goes back to whatever they were doing. No, this is different. There is someone who has been observing something about you, a talent, a natural ability, a particular quality, something you may not even realize is as powerful as it is. And this person, they have noticed, they have been paying attention to the way you do things, the way you think, the way you solve problems, the way you communicate, the way you notice details other people miss, the way you can take something ordinary and somehow make it look completely different. And the more they observe you, the more interested they become. Virgo, there is a strong possibility that you have underestimated yourself. You may think you are simply doing what comes naturally to you. You may think anybody could do this. This is not that special. I am just being myself. But the problem is that people with natural gifts often do not recognize their own gifts. You are too close to yourself. You have been living with your own mind your entire life. You have become accustomed to the way you see things. You have become accustomed to your instincts, your creativity, your intelligence, your ability to organize chaos, your ability to notice tiny details, your ability to understand people, your ability to make something better, your ability to see what is missing before anyone else even realizes there is a problem. To you, it may feel normal. To someone else, it may be extraordinary. And this particular individual may have noticed that they may be someone who has access to opportunities, someone who is respected, someone who is recognized, someone whose name carries weight, someone who has influence in a certain environment, and they may have been watching you quietly. Not necessarily in a frightening way, not in the sense that you should feel paranoid, more like someone who has become genuinely curious about your potential. They may have seen something you did, a project, a conversation, a decision, a piece of work, a creative idea, a way you handled pressure, a way you interacted with people, a moment where you solved something that other people were struggling with. And they may have thought, wait a minute, who is this person? Because there is something about you that may have caught their attention. And perhaps the strange part is that you were not even trying to impress them. You were not performing. You were not attempting to show off. You were not walking around trying to prove that you were talented. You were simply doing what you do. And that may have been exactly what made you stand out. There is a difference between someone who desperately wants to appear talented and someone who naturally has a gift. The first person constantly needs to prove themselves. The second person often does not even realize how much other people are noticing. And perhaps you fall into the second category. You may have a tendency to minimize your own abilities. You may look at something you have created or accomplished and think, it could be better. I still have a lot to learn. I am not ready yet. And while you are focused on what is missing, someone else may be looking at what is already there. They may see potential. They may see originality. They may see discipline. They may see a mind that does not operate like everyone else's. And perhaps they are interested because they understand something you have not fully accepted yet. You are not ordinary in the way you approach things. You may have a specific way of analyzing situations. You may notice patterns. You may connect ideas that other people keep separate. You may be able to understand complicated things and simplify them. You may be able to sense when something is wrong before anyone gives you an explanation. You may be able to look at a person and immediately understand what they are not saying. You may be able to detect weaknesses in a plan. You may be able to recognize opportunities hidden inside problems. And perhaps this person has noticed that your mind works differently. They may not even know how to explain it. They simply know that when you are involved, something changes. The result becomes sharper, more organized, more precise, more interesting, more effective, and perhaps they have started wondering, what else can this person do? That question may be the reason they keep paying attention. Because one of the most attractive things about talent is not only what someone has already accomplished, it is the possibility of what they could accomplish next. And this individual may see that potential in you. They may not see you as someone who has reached the end of their journey. They may see you as someone who is only beginning to understand what they are capable of. That can be incredibly exciting to someone with experience, especially if they have already seen many people. They may have met ambitious people. They may have met intelligent people. They may have met people who are talented, but perhaps you have something different. Maybe you are talented and still humble. Maybe you are intelligent but do not constantly need to announce it. Maybe you are capable but still question yourself. Maybe you have more potential than confidence. And that combination can make someone very interested because they may be thinking, if Virgo ever fully realizes what they can do, there will be no stopping them. And perhaps that is exactly what they are waiting to see. They may be watching your progress, watching the way you develop, watching the way you respond to opportunities, watching what you do when nobody is applauding. Because real talent is not only visible when everything is easy. Sometimes the most impressive thing about a person is how they behave when things are difficult. And you may have shown this person something. Maybe you kept going after a disappointment. Maybe you continued improving when nobody was paying attention. Maybe you learned something difficult without receiving much recognition. Maybe you took criticism and turned it into improvement. Maybe you were underestimated. And instead of wasting all your energy trying to convince people, you simply continued working. That kind of energy can attract the attention of someone experienced because people who have achieved something themselves often recognize qualities in others. They know what discipline looks like. They know what potential looks like. They know what raw talent looks like before it becomes polished. And perhaps when they look at you, they see something unfinished but powerful. They may see someone who has not yet fully stepped into their ability, someone who may still be holding back, someone who may still be waiting for permission. And perhaps they are thinking, why are they not doing more with this? That may be the part that fascinates them, because you may have a gift that you have been treating like a hobby. You may have a skill that you have been hiding behind modesty. You may have an ability that you only use when necessary. You may be doing something naturally that other people spend years trying to learn. And perhaps you have never considered that. Maybe people have complimented you before, but You did not take them seriously. Maybe people told you, "You are really good at this." And you replied, "Really?" As if you were genuinely surprised. Maybe you assumed they were just being nice. Maybe you thought they were exaggerating, but perhaps they were not. Perhaps you have been receiving clues for years. And now someone with a much bigger perspective has noticed the same thing. This person may be observing you because they are trying to understand your potential. They may want to know whether your talent is consistent, whether it appears only occasionally, whether you can perform under pressure, whether you can handle responsibility, whether you can adapt, whether you can work with others, whether you can take an idea and turn it into something real. And perhaps you are passing these tests without even realizing that you are being evaluated. You may think you are simply living your life, but someone may be taking mental notes. They may notice how you react when plans change. They may notice how you handle difficult people. They may notice whether you remain calm. They may notice whether you take initiative. They may notice whether you need to be told what to do or whether you can see what needs to be done. And perhaps your ability to act without constantly waiting for instructions has impressed them. Because there are many people who are capable when someone is watching, but there are fewer people who can see what needs to happen before someone tells them. That may be one of your gifts. You may naturally anticipate problems. You may naturally organize things. You may naturally notice what could be improved. You may naturally understand how different parts of a situation connect. And perhaps this person has realized that you do not simply follow systems. You understand systems. You can see where they work, where they fail, where they need improvement. And perhaps that is valuable, very valuable, especially to someone who operates at a high level. People in positions of influence often need individuals who can see beyond the obvious. They need people who can think independently, people who can identify opportunities, people who are not afraid to say, "This is not working." But also, "Here is how we could make it better." And perhaps you have that ability. You may not always be comfortable speaking up. You may sometimes overthink whether your opinion is valuable. You may worry that someone will judge you. But when you finally speak, people may realize that you have been observing everything. You are quiet because you were thinking, not because you had nothing to say. And perhaps this individual has noticed that. They may have seen you remain silent while everyone else was talking. Then, when you finally gave your opinion, the entire conversation changed. That can be memorable, especially to someone who has seen many people talk simply to be heard. You may not speak constantly, but when you do speak, there is often a reason. There is thought behind it. There is observation behind it. There is experience behind it. And perhaps this person finds that fascinating. They may wonder what else is happening inside your mind. They may wonder what you see that other people do not. They may wonder what you could create if you had the right resources, the right support, the right environment, the right opportunity. And perhaps that is why they are becoming increasingly interested in you. They may not be obsessed with your appearance. They may not be fascinated only by your personality. They may be fascinated by what you can do, by what you know, by what you understand, by what you have not yet shown the world. And that kind of attention can feel different because it is not based on superficial attraction. It is based on recognition. Someone sees something in you, something that may have been overlooked by others. And perhaps you have spent a long time in environments where people did not fully appreciate you. Maybe you were surrounded by people who only saw what was obvious. They saw your responsibilities, your daily routine, your mistakes, your limitations, but they did not see the full picture. They did not see your potential. They did not see how quickly you could learn. They did not see how much you were capable of when you were genuinely motivated. And now someone else may be looking at you differently. They may not be judging you based on your past. They may be looking at your future. They may be asking, what could Virgo become? And perhaps that question is powerful because sometimes one person recognizing your potential can change the way you see yourself. You may have been waiting for external proof, waiting for someone to tell you that you are good enough, waiting for a sign that your effort has meaning, waiting for someone to notice. And now someone may have noticed, but perhaps they are not rushing to announce it. They may be observing quietly. They may not want to make their interest obvious. They may be studying you from a distance. They may be trying to understand whether you know your own value. Because there is something interesting about people who are naturally talented. Sometimes the person who has the most potential is the person who believes in themselves the least. You may be highly capable but constantly questioning yourself. You may look at people who are less skilled and wonder why they appear more confident. You may see someone doing something badly but presenting themselves with complete certainty. Meanwhile, you may be doing something exceptionally well and still thinking, I need more experience. I am not ready. Someone else is better. And perhaps this high profile individual has noticed that contradiction. They may see that your ability is greater than your self belief. And perhaps they are curious about what would happen if you finally trusted yourself. What would happen if you stopped waiting to be perfect? What would happen if you allowed yourself to be seen? What would happen if you stopped hiding behind preparation? Because, Virgo, you may have a tendency to prepare forever. You want to improve. You want to refine. You want to fix every weakness. You want to eliminate every possible mistake. And there is nothing wrong with excellence. But sometimes perfectionism can become a hiding place. You may tell yourself, I will show people when it is better, when I am more prepared, when I know more, when I am completely confident. But the truth is that you may never feel completely ready. And perhaps this person sees that. They may see that you are already capable of more than you believe. They may be waiting for you to stop asking whether you are ready and start asking what you could do if you tried. That is a completely different question. And perhaps they want to see you answer it. They may have noticed that you have a particular gift for improvement. You may take something and make it better. A system, a plan, a piece of work, a relationship, a strategy, a process, a creative concept. You may see what others overlook. You may notice the small things that create big problems. You may understand that tiny changes can create major results. And perhaps this is one of the reasons they are so interested in you. You may not always be the loudest person in the room, but you may be the person who understands what is really happening. You may not always receive credit immediately, but eventually people may come to you and say, "How did you know?" And your answer may be, "I just noticed." That may be your gift. You notice, you observe, you analyze, you connect, you improve, and sometimes you understand before you can explain how you understand. That kind of instinct is difficult to teach. It can be developed, it can be refined, but the natural foundation has to exist. And perhaps this individual believes that you have that foundation. They may be watching to see whether you are aware of it. They may give you small opportunities, small challenges, small tests. They may place you in situations where your abilities become visible, and perhaps you have been passing without realizing that the stakes were higher than you thought. Maybe someone asked for your opinion. You thought it was casual, but they were listening carefully. Maybe someone gave you a responsibility. You thought it was ordinary, but they were watching how you handled it. Maybe someone introduced you to another person. You thought it was just networking, but perhaps there was a reason. There may be more happening around you than you realize. And perhaps this is why you should pay closer attention to the people who are suddenly interested in your work. The people who ask questions, the people who want to know what you are doing next, the people who remember your ideas, the people who mention something you said weeks ago, the people who suddenly appear when you are working on something important, they may be observing more than you think. And perhaps one particular person is especially curious. This person may not necessarily be directly involved in your daily life. They may be someone you have only interacted with briefly, someone you know by reputation, someone who has seen you through other people, someone who has heard about you, someone who has watched your work from a distance, and perhaps they are trying to figure out how to approach you because they may not want to make their interest obvious. They may be wondering whether you would recognize the opportunity. They may be wondering whether you would be intimidated. They may be wondering whether you would believe in yourself enough to accept something bigger. And perhaps that is the real question, not whether you have the talent. They may already believe you do. The question is whether you believe it. Because sometimes an opportunity can arrive and we reject it before it even has a chance. We say, "I am not qualified. I do not know enough. Why would they choose me?" And perhaps the answer is because they see something you do not. You may be so focused on the areas where you are still growing that you fail to see the areas where you are already exceptional. You may compare yourself to people who have been doing something for 10 years. You may forget that you are still developing. You may look at the final product of someone else's journey and compare it to the beginning of yours. That is not fair to you. And perhaps this person sees that you are closer than you think. You may be one opportunity away from a completely different level of recognition, not because everything will magically become easy, but because the right person may finally place you in the right environment. There are people who are talented but remain invisible because nobody with influence ever notices them. And then there are moments when one person sees them. One person says, "Wait, one more look. Tell me more about this person." And suddenly the path begins to change. Perhaps that is the kind of energy surrounding you. Someone may have noticed you. Someone may have mentioned you. Someone may have recommended you. Someone may have said, you should talk to Virgo. And perhaps the person who heard that became curious. Then they looked, then they watched, then they became interested. And now they may be thinking, why did I not notice this person earlier? That may be the reason the attention feels intense. Because when someone discovers a talent they believe has been overlooked, they can become very focused on it. They want to understand it. They want to see more. They want to know whether the potential is real. And perhaps every time they see you, you give them another reason to keep paying attention. You may surprise them. You may solve something. You may say something intelligent. You may show a skill they did not expect. And they may think, again, there is more. That can create fascination because they may have expected one specific ability. Then they discover another and another and another. You may be the kind of person who has more than one talent. You may be good at analyzing, but also communicating. You may be organized, but also creative. You may be logical, but also intuitive. You may be serious, but also funny. You may be precise, but also capable of seeing the bigger picture. That combination is rare. Many people are either focused on details or the larger vision. But perhaps you can move between both. You can see the tiny mistake, and you can also see how that tiny mistake affects the entire system. You can understand the immediate problem, and you can also think about what happens next. That may be why you are valuable. You do not only ask, what is happening? You ask, why is it happening? What caused it? What happens if we do nothing? What can be improved? What could this become? And perhaps this person is fascinated by the way your mind works. They may ask you questions simply to hear you explain your thinking. They may bring you into conversations because they want your perspective. They may notice that other people become more focused when you speak. And perhaps you have no idea how much influence your words can have. You may say something casually, someone else may remember it for months. You may give advice without thinking much about it. Someone else may use it to make an important decision. You may create something because you enjoy it. Someone else may see commercial potential. You may solve a problem because it annoys you. Someone else may see a business opportunity. This is why you should not assume that something is insignificant simply because it comes naturally to you. Your natural ability may be valuable precisely because it does not feel difficult to you. The things that are easy for you may be difficult for someone else. And perhaps this high-profile individual understands that. They may be looking at you and thinking, Virgo does not realize how valuable this is. That may be why they are so interested, because they are not only seeing what you can do now, they are imagining what you could do with support, with resources, with training, with access, with the right people around you. And perhaps that possibility is exciting. They may see the version of you that you have not yet become, the version with more confidence, more experience, more visibility, more authority, more opportunities. And perhaps they are curious about how far you could go. They may not be trying to control your path. They may simply be watching because they recognize potential. And perhaps that is a beautiful thing. Sometimes we do not need everyone to recognize us. We only need the right person to notice. The right person can open a door. The right person can introduce you to someone. The right person can recommend you. The right person can say your name in a room you have never entered. And suddenly, people who have never met you are asking, "Who is Virgo?" That may be what is happening behind the scenes. You may be more visible than you think. Your work may be traveling further than you realize. Your name may be mentioned in conversations you are not part of. Someone may be speaking positively about your ability. Someone may be saying, "They are good. They understand this. They have potential. They should be given a chance." And perhaps the high profile individual has heard enough to become curious. Now they want to see for themselves. That is why you may feel as though someone is paying closer attention. Maybe you notice people asking you unusual questions. Maybe someone seems to remember details about your work. Maybe someone who normally does not interact with you suddenly becomes interested. Maybe you feel as though someone is observing your progress. And perhaps you are not imagining the increased attention, but remember this: being observed is not always a negative thing. Sometimes it means someone is trying to understand your value. Sometimes it means someone is considering you for something. Sometimes it means someone sees potential. And perhaps this person is waiting for the right moment. They may not want to rush. They may want to make sure you are ready. They may want to see whether you remain consistent. They may want to know whether your talent is something you are willing to develop, because potential alone is not enough. Talent is only the beginning. What matters is what you do with it. And perhaps they are watching for your commitment. They may be asking, "Does Virgo really want this? Will Virgo continue when it becomes difficult? Can Virgo handle attention? Can Virgo handle criticism? Can Virgo handle success?" Those questions matter because some people are talented but collapse when they receive recognition. Others are talented and become even stronger. And perhaps this person is trying to discover which type you are. Maybe they are observing how you react to compliments. Do you accept them? Or do you immediately dismiss them? Maybe they are observing how you react to criticism. Do you become defensive? Or do you consider whether there is something useful in it? Maybe they are observing whether you can remain focused, whether you can continue working without immediate rewards, whether you can build something slowly, and perhaps they like what they see. You may not be perfect, but you may be consistent. You may keep learning. You may keep improving. You may keep showing up, and that matters more than people realize. Talent can create attention, but consistency creates trust. And perhaps this individual is beginning to trust your ability. They may think, "If Virgo keeps developing, this could become something significant." That is a powerful thought, and perhaps you should allow yourself to consider it too. What if you are more capable than you have allowed yourself to believe? What if your talent is not just something you do occasionally? What if it is something you could build a future around? What if the thing you keep treating as a side skill is actually one of your greatest strengths? What if the person who has been watching you sees a possibility you have ignored? You do not need to have all the answers today. You do not need to know exactly where your gift will lead. But you should not continue pretending that it does not exist. Your talent deserves attention. Your ideas deserve consideration. Your abilities deserve development. And perhaps this person is appearing in your life as a reminder of that. They may be someone who forces you to take yourself more seriously, someone who sees your value before you do, someone who challenges you to stop hiding behind modesty, because humility is beautiful. But constantly minimizing yourself is not humility. Sometimes it is fear, fear of being judged, fear of failing publicly, fear of being successful and then having to maintain that success, fear of people expecting more from you, fear of discovering that you really are capable and having no more excuses. And perhaps that is the uncomfortable truth. If you fully accept your gift, you may have to do something with it. You may have to step forward. You may have to take risks. You may have to allow people to see you. You may have to stop hiding behind, I am still learning. Because yes, you are still learning. Everyone is. But you can be learning and still be talented. You can be developing and still be valuable. You can be imperfect and still be chosen. And perhaps this high profile person understands that they are not looking for someone who knows everything. They may be looking for someone who can learn, someone who can adapt, someone who can grow, someone who has the foundation. And perhaps you have that. You may have more than the skill. You may have the mindset. You may have the curiosity. You may have the discipline. You may have the ability to keep going. And perhaps that is why they are becoming so interested. Because raw talent is exciting, but talent combined with discipline, that is powerful. Talent combined with intelligence, powerful. Talent combined with the ability to understand people, even more powerful. Talent combined with the ability to remain calm when everyone else is panicking, now you become someone people remember. And perhaps you have shown all of these qualities, maybe not perfectly, maybe not every day, but enough for someone to notice, enough for someone to become curious, enough for someone to think, there is something here. That phrase may be important. There is something here. Sometimes other people can see the beginning of something before we can. They see the potential. They see the spark. They see the direction. And perhaps this individual is trying to determine whether you are ready to develop it. They may not be obsessed with you in the way people usually imagine. They may be obsessed with the question, what could Virgo become? And that can be even more powerful because they may be looking at you as an opportunity, not an opportunity to exploit you, but an opportunity to invest in potential, to support someone who could eventually become highly valuable, to discover someone before everyone else does. And perhaps they enjoy the feeling of finding talent early. They may have done this before. They may know what it is like to recognize someone before the rest of the world does. And perhaps you are giving them that feeling. They may be thinking, I saw this before everyone else. And that can create a strong connection because they may feel personally invested in your progress. They may want to see you succeed. They may want to be able to say, I knew Virgo had something. And perhaps you should not be surprised if this person eventually becomes more direct. They may approach you. They may ask for a conversation. They may offer advice. They may invite you somewhere. They may connect you with someone. They may ask you to show them more of your work. They may suddenly make their interest obvious. And when that happens, do not immediately assume that you are not ready. Take a moment, listen, ask questions, understand what is being offered. You do not have to say yes to everything. You do not have to trust blindly. You do not have to abandon your judgment. Your ability to analyze is one of your strengths. Use it, but do not reject something simply because it is bigger than what you are used to. Sometimes an opportunity feels uncomfortable because it requires you to become a larger version of yourself. And perhaps this is one of those moments you may feel nervous. You may feel uncertain. You may wonder whether you belong in the room. But perhaps the fact that you were invited is evidence that someone believes you do. You do not have to be the most experienced person in the room to deserve to be there. You do not have to know everything. You do not have to be perfect. You simply need to bring your ability, your perspective, your willingness to learn, your unique way of seeing things. And perhaps that is enough. This high profile individual may not be looking for a copy of themselves. They may be looking for something they do not have, a different perspective, a different skill, a different way of thinking, and perhaps that is what you bring. You may see things from an angle they have not considered. You may understand a group of people they do not understand. You may have knowledge they do not have. You may have a creative instinct that cannot be replaced by experience. And perhaps that is why your gift is so valuable. It is yours. Nobody else has your exact combination of experiences, your exact way of thinking, your exact perspective, your exact instincts. Even if someone else has similar skills, they cannot replicate the way you use them. That is what makes your talent unique. And perhaps this individual is beginning to recognize that they may have seen other people who are technically skilled, but you may bring something personal, something difficult to copy, something that comes from your personality, your life, your perspective, and perhaps that is why they are fascinated. You are not simply good at something. You have a particular way of doing it. And people remember that. They remember the person who makes something feel different. They remember the person who sees the detail nobody else saw. They remember the person who says the thing everyone else was thinking but nobody wanted to say. They remember the person who solves the problem nobody wanted to touch. They remember the person who remains calm when everything becomes chaotic. And perhaps that person is you. Maybe you do not realize how often people rely on your abilities. Maybe you think they are simply asking for help, but perhaps they ask because they know you can see what they cannot. They may not always say it. They may not always give you credit, but they know, and this individual may have noticed the pattern. They may have noticed that when you are involved, people come to you. They may have noticed that you become the person others trust. They may have noticed that you can take responsibility without needing constant supervision. And that can be extremely attractive to someone who has influence, because influence comes with responsibility. People at high levels do not have time to constantly monitor every detail. They need people who can handle things, people who can think, people who can make decisions, people who can communicate, people who can identify problems before they become disasters. And perhaps your gift is not only what you know, it is your ability to apply what you know. That is rare. Many people have knowledge. Fewer people know how to use it. And perhaps you do. You may be able to turn ideas into action. You may be able to turn confusion into structure. You may be able to turn problems into solutions. You may be able to turn a small opportunity into something much larger. And perhaps this individual is watching because they want to know how far that ability can go. They may be asking themselves, what happens if Virgo gets more responsibility? What happens if Virgo gets more resources? What happens if Virgo is placed in a bigger environment? And perhaps the answer is you grow, you adapt, you learn, you become stronger. You may be nervous at first, but you figure things out. That may be one of your greatest qualities. You do not need to know everything immediately. You simply need enough information to begin. Once you begin, you learn. Once you learn, you improve. Once you improve, you become more confident. And eventually, you look back and realize, I was capable of this the entire time. Perhaps that realization is coming, and perhaps this high profile individual will play a role in it, not by giving you your talent. You already have it, not by making you capable. You already are, but by showing you that someone else can see what you have been ignoring. Sometimes we need an outside perspective. We need someone to say, do you realize what you are doing? Do you realize how good you are at this? Do you realize how rare that ability is? And perhaps you are about to hear something like that. Maybe not in those exact words, but through someone's actions, through an opportunity, through an invitation, through an introduction, through someone choosing you when you expected someone else to be chosen. And perhaps you will be surprised. You may ask, why me? And perhaps the answer is simple, because they have been watching, because they have noticed, because your gift has been visible to someone who knows what to look for. And perhaps this is a reminder that you should not underestimate the power of being consistent. You may think nobody is paying attention, but people are. They notice who keeps showing up. They notice who improves. They notice who handles pressure. They notice who can be trusted. They notice who brings something unique. And perhaps someone with influence has been paying attention to you for longer than you realize. You may have assumed that certain people were not aware of you, but perhaps they are. You may have assumed that your work disappeared into the background, but perhaps someone saw it. You may have assumed that your ability was ordinary, but perhaps someone with experience recognized it as rare. That is the message here. Do not assume that being unnoticed by everyone means being unnoticed by the right person. Sometimes the most important person in the room is not the loudest person. Sometimes they are the person quietly observing, the person asking questions, the person remembering names, the person noticing potential. And perhaps that is what this individual has been doing. Watching, observing, studying, not in a negative way, in a way that says, I want to understand what this person is capable of. And perhaps the more they understand, the more interested they become. Because your talent may not be something that reveals itself all at once. It may have layers. At first, they notice one thing, then another, then another. And eventually, they realize that your ability is bigger than they initially thought. That can create fascination because every new discovery makes them want to know more. And perhaps that is why they are becoming slightly obsessed. They may find themselves thinking about you after the interaction ends. They may wonder what you are working on. They may wonder what you could do next. They may wonder whether you are aware of your own potential. They may even become frustrated when you hold yourself back. They may think, why are they not taking this more seriously? And perhaps they want to push you, not because they think you are incapable, because they think you are capable of more. That is an important distinction. Someone who sees nothing in you will not care whether you reach your potential. Someone who sees something may become impatient. They may say, you need to do more. You need to put yourself out there. You need to stop hiding. And perhaps that advice may annoy you. Because Virgo, you may not enjoy being rushed. You may want to move at your own pace. You may want to prepare. You may want to make sure everything is correct. But perhaps this person is trying to show you that there comes a point when preparation must become action. You cannot remain in the planning stage forever. At some point, you have to release the work. You have to accept that it may not be perfect. You have to let people see what you can do. And perhaps you are closer to that moment than you think. The world cannot recognize a gift that you refuse to show. You cannot receive opportunities for something you keep hidden. And perhaps this person is watching because they want to see whether you will step forward. They may already see your ability. Now they want to see your courage. And perhaps you have more courage than you realize. You have survived things. You have started over. You have learned. You have adapted. You have continued after disappointment. You may not think of yourself as brave because you do not always feel brave. But courage does not require the absence of fear. It requires movement despite fear. And perhaps you have done that many times. This person may have noticed. They may see that you are stronger than your insecurities. They may see that you continue even when you doubt yourself. And perhaps that is one of the reasons they believe in your future. Because talent can be developed, confidence can be built, experience can be gained. But the willingness to keep going, that has to come from within. And perhaps you already have it. You may have more resilience than you give yourself credit for. And perhaps this high profile individual is seeing that too. They may not be interested in a perfect person. They may be interested in a person with potential, a person who can grow, a person who can learn, a person who can become something significant. And perhaps you are that person. So, Virgo, pay attention to the way people are responding to you. Pay attention to who suddenly asks for your opinion. Pay attention to who remembers your ideas. Pay attention to who wants to know what you are doing next. Pay attention to who seems unusually interested in your progress. Pay attention to the people who do not simply compliment you but ask questions. Those people may be seeing something. And perhaps one person in particular is seeing a lot. They may not tell you immediately. They may continue watching. They may wait for the right opportunity. But the attention is there. And perhaps the fascination is growing because every time you show another side of your ability, they become more convinced. You may be closer to recognition than you think, not necessarily instant fame, not necessarily some unrealistic overnight transformation, but recognition, the kind that comes from the right people, the kind that creates access, the kind that leads to conversations, the kind that puts your name in places it has never been before. And perhaps this is the beginning of something important. A person with influence may be looking at you and thinking, Virgo has something, and perhaps now it is time for you to start thinking the same. You do not need to become arrogant. You do not need to believe you are better than everyone. You do not need to prove anything to people who refuse to see you. But you do need to stop pretending that your gifts are insignificant. You need to respect your own abilities. You need to take your ideas seriously. You need to invest in yourself. You need to stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to become the person you are capable of becoming. Because perhaps someone is already watching. Perhaps someone is already interested. Perhaps someone is already imagining what you could become. And perhaps the only person who has not fully realized it yet is you. That may be the most surprising part of all. This person may have recognized your gift before you recognized its value. They may have seen the potential before you felt confident enough to claim it. They may have looked at something you consider ordinary and seen something extraordinary. And perhaps one day you will understand why they were paying attention. You will look back at the moments you doubted yourself, the opportunities you almost rejected, the times you said, I am not ready. And you may realize, maybe I was more ready than I thought. Maybe the attention you are receiving is not random. Maybe the interest is not accidental. Maybe someone has been watching because they see a future version of you that you are still learning to imagine. The version of you who speaks with authority. The version of you who trusts their instincts. The version of you who no longer apologizes for being talented. The version of you who walks into rooms knowing they have something valuable to offer. The version of you who does not need to be the loudest person because the quality of your work speaks for itself. The version of you who finally understands, I do not have to convince everyone. I only need to continue developing what I have. And perhaps that is the energy you are stepping into. Not chasing attention, not begging for recognition, not forcing anyone to see you, simply becoming so good, so consistent, so undeniable in your own way that the right people cannot ignore you. And perhaps this high profile individual is one of those people. They may be curious. They may be impressed. They may be fascinated. They may be trying to understand the full extent of your ability. And yes, they may be a little obsessed. Because once someone recognizes genuine potential, it can be difficult to stop wondering where it could lead. They may be thinking about your next move, your next idea, your next project, your next opportunity, and perhaps they are waiting for you to show them more. So do not hide. Do not make yourself smaller. Do not dismiss your own talent simply because it feels natural to you. Some of your greatest gifts may be the things you have never considered special because they come so easily. The way you think, the way you notice, the way you organize, the way you create, the way you solve, the way you understand, the way you continue. Those qualities matter. And someone may have noticed someone important, someone with access, someone with influence, someone who may eventually have the ability to place you in a completely different environment. But before that happens, there is one thing you need to understand. You do not need to become someone else to be worthy of recognition. You do not need to copy anyone. You do not need to change your personality. You do not need to become louder. You do not need to become more aggressive. You do not need to pretend to be confident every second. Your gift is already yours. Your perspective is already yours. Your ability is already yours. The next step is simply learning how to trust it. And perhaps this person is watching because they want to see what happens when you do. What happens when Virgo stops asking, "Am I good enough?" and starts asking, "What can I do with what I have?" That question could change everything because your gift may not be meant to remain hidden in the background. It may be meant to grow, to evolve, to reach more people, to create opportunities, to open doors. And perhaps the person who has been watching you already sees that potential. They may see the version of you that is not yet fully visible to the world. And perhaps very soon you will begin to see it too. So the next time you catch someone paying unusually close attention to what you do, do not immediately dismiss it. The next time someone asks about your skills, your ideas, your plans, or your future, listen carefully. The next time someone with influence takes an interest in your work, do not assume they are simply being polite. Maybe they saw something, maybe they noticed something, maybe they have been paying attention longer than you realize. And maybe behind that calm expression, they are thinking, how is this person not already being recognized? Because your gift may be much bigger than you think. And perhaps the most exciting part is that you have not even shown them everything yet. They have only seen a glimpse, a sample, a small piece, a preview of what you are capable of. And if they are already this interested now, imagine what happens when you finally stop holding yourself back. Imagine what happens when you stop waiting for permission. Imagine what happens when you decide that your talent deserves space. Because perhaps this person is not obsessed with the version of you that is already finished. They are fascinated by the possibility of the version of you that is still becoming, the version that is learning, growing, improving, expanding. And perhaps they know something you are only beginning to understand. You are not at your peak. You are not at the end. You are not limited to what you have already done. There is more in you, more ability, more creativity, more intelligence, more potential, more than you have allowed yourself to believe. And perhaps someone has been watching closely because they can see it. They can see the gift. They can see the future. They can see the possibility. Now, the question is, will you? Because maybe the person who has been monitoring your progress is not the only one who should be paying attention. Maybe it is time for you to pay attention to your ideas, to your instincts, to the things people repeatedly compliment, to the skills people constantly ask you to use, to the areas where you naturally excel, to the things that feel effortless to you but impressive to everyone else. Those are clues, and perhaps you have been ignoring them. Not anymore. You do not have to announce your talent to the world. You do not have to convince everyone. You do not have to chase recognition. But you do need to stop hiding from your own potential, because somewhere out there, someone may already be looking at you and thinking, Virgo is going to be important. And perhaps they are not wrong. Maybe they saw the gift before you did. Maybe they recognized the potential before you had the confidence to claim it. Maybe they are watching because they are waiting to see whether you will finally understand what they already know. You are capable of more, much more And perhaps this person is not obsessed with you because you are trying to be impressive. They are fascinated because you are impressive without trying. That is the difference. You may be sitting there thinking, I am just doing what I do. And somewhere, someone with experience may be thinking, exactly, keep doing that because there is something here. And perhaps this is only the beginning of them discovering what you are capable of. The real question is not whether they are watching. The real question is what they are going to see next. Because Virgo, you may have been underestimated for a long time, but the right eyes are finally paying attention. And when the right person recognizes a gift, they do not always forget it. They remember, they watch, they wait. They look for the next sign, the next achievement, the next idea, the next moment when you reveal another layer of your ability. And perhaps this individual is already wondering, what else can Virgo do? So let them wonder, let them watch, let them become curious, let them discover you slowly. You do not need to rush to prove anything. Your gift will speak. Your work will speak. Your mind will speak. Your consistency will speak. And eventually, even the people who once overlooked you may begin asking, where did Virgo come from? But you will know. You were always there. You were always learning, always observing, always improving, always carrying something inside you that was waiting for the right environment, the right opportunity, the right person to notice. And perhaps that person has finally noticed. So, yes, Virgo, someone may be watching you more closely than you realize. Someone may be fascinated by your ability. Someone may be thinking about your potential. Someone may be trying to understand the full extent of your gift. And perhaps behind all of their questions and all of their attention, there is one simple thought. This person is special, not because you are perfect, not because you know everything, not because you never make mistakes, but because there is something in the way you think, create, solve, understand, and continue that cannot be easily copied. And perhaps that is what they have been seeing, a gift, a mind, a potential, a future, something that may become much bigger than you currently realize. So the next time you catch yourself saying, it is nothing, it is not a big deal. Anyone could do that. Stop for a moment. Maybe not everyone could. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the thing you dismiss is the exact thing someone else has been watching. Maybe the ability you take for granted is the reason someone important has become interested. Maybe the talent you have been keeping in the background is the very thing that could eventually place you in rooms you never imagined entering. And perhaps this person is already waiting to see what happens when you finally decide to step into your own potential, because they may already be convinced. They may already see it. They may already be curious. They may already be a little obsessed. Now it is your turn to notice. Notice yourself. Notice your abilities. Notice the patterns. Notice what keeps coming naturally to you. Notice what people repeatedly come to you for. Notice the things you do that others struggle to do. Notice the moments when you create something and someone suddenly becomes quiet because they are impressed. Those moments matter. They are evidence. And perhaps for a long time, you have been waiting for someone else to tell you that you are capable, Maybe someone finally has, maybe not with a speech, maybe not with a dramatic announcement, maybe simply by watching, by remembering, by asking questions, by giving you attention, by creating an opportunity, by saying your name in a room where you are not present. And perhaps that is how recognition begins, quietly, before anyone else knows. Before you even know, one person notices, one person becomes curious, one person starts watching, and then slowly the world begins to catch up. So, Virgo, do not be surprised if someone important seems unusually interested in what you can do. Do not be surprised if someone asks for more. Do not be surprised if someone sees potential where you only see unfinished work. Do not be surprised if someone believes in the future version of you before you are ready to believe in yourself, because perhaps they are not seeing something imaginary. Perhaps they are seeing what is already there: the gift, the talent, the intelligence, the instinct, the ability, the potential. And perhaps they are simply waiting for you to stop hiding it. Because one day you may look back and realize that the person who was watching you was not obsessed with a fantasy. They were paying attention to the real you, the person who was quietly developing, quietly learning, quietly becoming, and perhaps they recognized something before the rest of the world did. They saw the spark before the fire. They saw the beginning before the achievement. They saw the potential before the recognition. And perhaps, Virgo, that is exactly where you are right now. At the moment before people begin to understand what you can really do, at the moment before your talent becomes impossible to ignore, at the moment before the person watching you stops observing from a distance and finally says, "Let us talk." And when that moment comes, remember this: you do not have to pretend you are someone else. You do not have to suddenly become perfect. You do not have to have every answer. You simply need to bring what you already have: your mind, your talent, your perspective, your discipline, your ability to notice what other people miss, your ability to make something better, your ability to keep learning, your ability to keep going. That may be more than enough. Because perhaps the reason this person is watching is not because you have already become everything you are capable of becoming. It is because they can see that you are on your way. And maybe, just maybe, they are not the only one who is about to discover what your gift can do. Maybe you are about to discover it too.